All right. Good morning, Urban Faith. It is so good to be with you again. We are so excited to have with us today the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, who is just a revolutionary justice seeker, a jazz man, the pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, Illinois, and the author of Dancing in the Darkness, Spiritual Lessons for Thriving in Turbulent Times. An old just a hero and an alumni who preceded me. And so I'm so glad to have Reverend Moss with us today to talk about his book. Thank you for being with us, Reverend Moss.
Well, Minister Allen Reynolds, it is a delight to be with you, with my Yale colleague and alum.
That's right.
And of course, the great work that you're doing with Urban Ministries. We certainly appreciate you, and I'm delighted to be a part of the conversation.
Absolutely. And so, Reverend Moss, I'll get right back into this. I feel like as I've been hearing about this, so many people are talking about the book, and with good reason. I just feel like it's so timely. Like right now, as we've gone through and are now still on the tail end of a pandemic, we're seeing so much angst. I feel like 2023 started rough for a lot of folks. And this is so on time to give us ways to deal with the difficulties we see all around us. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to see the response now and why you feel like, this was the time to release a book like this?
I have been just amazed by the way the book has been received by so many people, not just people in the African American community, but all across the spectrum. Our Latino brothers and sisters, Asian brothers and sisters, and our white brothers and sisters, and our indigenous brothers and sisters
Wow.
found a connection with this book, which is deeply rooted in the Black faith tradition, the Black spiritual tradition that runs the gamut in reference to the social justice aspect and so much of our history, but people find a deep connection.
Yeah.
I felt the need to write it because I felt that there was a spiritual itch that I was witnessing across the nation, where people were trying to scratch something, either with social media, clout chasing, materialism, but they end up empty after they chase in that manner.
Yeah.
That these values of love, of justice, of compassion, of dignity, of reciprocity that are rooted in our tradition, so many people need personally, but you need those values if you are going to transform our nation, transform our community, and ultimately the world.
I think that that's so true. And one of the things that's at the heart of so much of what you talk about in the book is this need for justice and this need for love that get disconnected in a lot of the discourse in the world and in society, and how you name how that's part of the Black revolutionary tradition, the Black spiritual traditions. Can you talk a little bit about why we need to connect those two? And I feel like you give us some real principles as to how we can do that today in ways we haven't really heard about a lot.
Well, I love to say, and it's in the book where I say that you can't have love without justice,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't have justice without love. That love without justice is just sentimentality.
Mm-hmm.
And then justice removed from love becomes legalism, brutality. It becomes just retribution. But when they're merged together, love and justice get married. They
Mm-hmm.
always have two children. One child is named transformation, and the other child is named liberation.
Mm.
Our tradition, the Black spiritual tradition, has been one that has raised the question, you are a child of God. Now, how do we live in this world that is just, not just for us, but for everyone? I
Yeah.
have a button that I got from a place in Hyde Park called the Silver Room that
Mm.
says everything you love about America is from Black people.
Mm.
It's funny, but at the same time, it's so much true, so true. So what does that mean? It means that when you talk about freedom in America, the Bill of Rights, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, the women's suffrage movement, the labor movement, all of these aspects of expanding what America is on when you talk about rights, Black folk were at the center. And then if you want to talk about the arts, of course, everything musically that you love in America comes from us. If you want to talk about culinary, so much of what you love in America is a hybrid of what we have created. When you talk about the stories and literature and art, you're still talking about Black people. But America, whenever America expands in the direction of good, you will find Black people at the center.
That just, it resonates with so many folks today. I feel like there's really this press in Black communities to reclaim our Black identity, and to reclaim our faith, and to reclaim that agency, that self-determination that's so much a part of our history. And you deal a little bit with particular figures, and especially highlighting around Dr. Howard Thurman and then Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and their impact on you and on that journey towards a more just society. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important that we adopt those legacies as we're trying to reclaim a sense of what it means to be African American or Black folks in this yet to be America? You italicize it.
Yes. Well, Howard Thurman, for me, I think, is been one of the most influential spiritual teachers. And I really received that from my father, that Howard Thurman was a teacher of his. Many people of this generation don't know who he was. And the legend has it that Dr. King carried 3 books with him. He had a Bible, he had a copy of the Constitution, and he carried the book Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman, where Howard Thurman says, Black people look at Jesus differently. We're not white evangelicals. We recognize not only in our interpretation of Jesus, that Jesus, quote, knows all about our troubles. He is a person from the outside. He understands colonialism. He's dealing with the powers of Rome. But also, we recognize from Genesis to Revelation, when you are reading the Bible, you're reading a book about folks from the South Side of Chicago. I use that as a joke, but you're talking about people of color, but specifically people of African descent. And then you have Thurman, who says his understanding of Jesus was enhanced by his grandmother, who was brilliant, but was a person who understood the pain of being an enslaved person. She said, I love me some Jesus, but I got some issues with what Paul says in terms of Paul saying, be obedient to your masters. She says, I got an issue with Paul. I want to have a conversation with Paul. And then Thurman realized, oh my goodness, in America, we have interpreted Paul in a particular way through the lens of white identity. And even in scripture, Paul was mistaken for a Black man. As a Roman said, aren't you that Egyptian? It's like, no, I'm a Roman citizen.
Wow.
And a very piece of scripture that we pass by, but that world was a world filled with people who looked like us. So now it's time to reclaim what our ancestors already knew, that the tradition of what we call Christianity, the faith of Jesus Christ, is a faith tradition that has been rooted in our culture and rooted in our community.
I just think that that's so, you have so many revolutionary moments, things that I think perhaps folks haven't thought about, and that strikes me. Somebody's going to be blessed by that. One of the chapters that I really liked was your chapter on dealing with bias. And I think that you open up a conversation that often in our community happens on Black-white terms, and you own that I, as a man, have gone through this as well at Yale, right? I got that same challenge by some of my women colleagues, my womanist colleagues in particular, to see how bias can impact all of us, right, regardless of our position, and that we can deal with that in gracious and graceful ways that allow us to grow and to be more effective. And I think that that can just extend out so much in our culture, right, as we're dealing with folks who have difference, right, and seeing so much hate. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important to deal with bias with grace and to recognize that we all can be impacted and benefit?
There's a beauty and there's a burden of being human. And part of the beauty is that we are created fearfully and wonderfully made.
Mm.
The burden is that we all carry with us blinders that keep us from seeing the totality of someone's humanity and beauty. And so I just shared the story, real simple story of we have a worship team at Trinity, and we're always putting together worship and whatnot. And we were really excited during Black History Month. We do this amazing celebration. We always like to say, no one does Black history like Trinity United Church of Christ. We're unashamedly Black and we're unapologetically Christian. And we were going to celebrate athletes who were also on the field, but also were promoting justice. So, we're going back in history. We're talking Jack Johnson. We wanted to lift up Muhammad Ali, of course, and of course, the gentlemen that raised their fist at the Olympics. So this particular meeting, which normally is filled with men and women, but for whatever reason, most of the sisters were not present because of a variety of other assignments, some that were personal, some they had to do some other work in the media team. It was just the guys there. And so after we finished our discussion, we said, all right, we're going to put on the cover all these great athletes. And then Sunday came around. We are proud of this beautiful bulletin. We are proud of the imagery that we're showing on the screen. And then Minister Janae Colvin, who is a delightful sister, who is now the chaplain at DePaul University, she said, we do a review of worship. We said, how did worship go? And she said, worship was great, but I had a problem. I opened up the bulletin and I saw nothing but brothers. I didn't see any sisters. And it was Minister Colvin who pointed out the bias. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I was in the room. I'm a brother. The media director was a brother. We had another minister who was a brother, and we were all focusing our heroes from our bias. We didn't have Althea Gibson in there. We didn't have Wilma Rudolph. We did not have the WNBA sisters who started the athletic Black Lives Matter movement. And I might add, it was the WNBA, the sisters, who were the first athletes to stand with Senator Raphael Warnock because their owner was someone who was promoting some of the painful, how should I say it, Confederate rhetoric of Trump. Yeah. And so they start wearing shirts at a game. We're for Warnock. And it just started this movement of young people talking about registering to vote. We completely missed because of our bias, because of the maleness. And what I learned is here I am as a pastor, and a good portion of the members are sisters and women, and all these young girls that were missing out the imagery and the power of seeing someone like them. My own daughter was missing the imagery that said, this is what you can be. And then that's why we have to investigate our own biases, because every one of us, the beauty of humanity also carries a burden, and we all have blinders.
And that's so true. And I appreciate the way that you dealt with it and the way that you talked about how the community was able to help hold you accountable. I think that's one of the really key things that comes up again and again in our tradition and here in your book. You mentioned your daughter, and as a father of 3 daughters, I am just so struck that,
pray for you.
Please pray for me. That one of your great lessons that it becomes the title of this book, comes from observing your daughter. And can you just give us a little bit of that hope? How is it that we can dance in the darkness, that we can confront the difficulties that we're seeing and learn how to address them with love, still seeking justice, and not to be overwhelmed by what we are seeing in our world?
Well, the origin story of the title really comes out of an experience in 2008. I'd started as pastor. I'd been at Trinity, but then I become senior pastor in 2008. I succeed Dr. Jeremiah Wright Jr., just an iconic and powerful preacher. And there was someone in our congregation, I was pastor at the time, who was running for president by the name of Senator Barack Obama, who becomes President Obama. I remember I was in Hyde Park, Allen, and I was doing a warm down. And then it was called Bally's. I think LA Fitness bought them at this point. But it was in Bally's. I was doing a warm down. I was just on the treadmill, finished my workout. Someone says, "Hey, Rev, is that your church up there?" I look up on the television screen, and Sean Hannity is going off about our church, that this is the worst un-American, unpatriotic thing that America has ever experienced. And this candidate is a part of this church. And I was like, oh, I got to go.
Yeah.
So that began a media gauntlet where for over a year, we had 40 outlets show up outside of our church. So if you wanted to come into Trinity, there were literally people putting microphones saying, "We need a comment. We need a comment," and that's how people worshiped. It was really challenging. And then from there, because so much conservative attention, death threats began. Dr. Wright received death threats. I received death threats. The church was receiving death threats collectively. And every worship service, we had to have bomb sniffing dogs come into the sanctuary to check for bombs. Wow. We had to be in constant contact with Secret Service and the FBI with every single threat that came through, whether it was email, whether it was letter, whether it was a phone call. We got a whole lot of voicemails. I just want to let you know, for those are filled up. And I had to get personal security, people that would follow me around. And there had to be security at my children's school. We had to sit down with the principal and say that there will always be someone who is going to be standing outside of the school. This is the individual. And if you see something that is out of the ordinary, you are to call District 22, which was right down the street, the commander. Here's the person. They will dispatch a unit to the school. That's how deep this was.
Wow.
Because the FBI was very clear. You have to take some of these threats very seriously, because we cannot identify who these individuals were. So I'm looking around all the time thinking, is this the person? Is this the person? Many times, honestly.
Wow.
And so one night, we heard something in our house. And my wife said, "You need to go check that out." So I grabbed my rod and my staff that comforts me. And that was a Louisville Slugger bat. I'm going around the house and I'm thinking, is this it? Am I going to have to defend myself, to protect my family, because someone has got high on the rhetoric from these conservative voices? And I hear the noise again. It's coming from my daughter's room. Wow. So I go in my daughter's room, and there's my daughter. She is about 5 at the time. She's in the middle of her room, in the middle of the dark. There she is dancing, saying, "Look, Daddy, I'm dancing." And I get that, fatherly tone, as you know, "Baby, you got to go to bed." It was 3 a.m.
Right.
I had to preach in a couple of hours.
Oh my gosh.
And as I'm annoyed and I'm wanting to go to sleep, the Spirit just rested and said, "Look at your daughter. Be quiet. Do you see her? She's dancing in the dark. The dark is around her, but the darkness is not in her. You've got to learn how to dance." And at that moment, I scrapped my sermon, went down to my study, and just wrote in my journal until the sun came up. And then I climbed into the pulpit at Trinity, and I told the congregation that God has called us to dance in the darkness. How do we dance? We dance by reclaiming our joy. How do we dance? We dance by demanding justice. How do we dance? We dance with dignity. How do we dance? We dance for generations that have not yet been born. And that is the way in which I believe that we can reclaim who we are, not only as a community, but we can shift and change these yet to be United States of America. Because the beautiful thing about dancing in the dark, as the psalmist says, I've turned your mourning into dancing, that when you are dancing in the dark, it is not because the sun has left you. It only means that the earth has turned. And if you dance long enough, eventually joy does come in the morning. And so we're called to dance during these dark times.
Wow. That it preached, right? And I think it preaches even now. I'll give you this last question. There's so many more I can ask because this book is just filled with just wisdom and perspective. One of the things that I always try to ask for our audience is people who are seeing you are seeing the success. I mean, not only are you an incredibly accomplished and caring pastor, but also an author. You've won awards for filmmaking now. You're doing so many things, and people might see that as success from the outside, but you're making an impact in so many people's lives. You have not left behind people as you continue to accomplish. And I think that that marriage is so important to see in our leaders. Can you give a little advice? What is your wisdom for young people like myself, younger, who are trying to become successful, but also trying to continue to uplift their community, to care for others? What advice, what wisdom might you give?
Don't try to be successful. Be faithful. Be authentic in who you are. Don't compare yourself to other people. We live in a world of comparison that you're not enough. But always remember, I come out of the golden age of hip hop. I was a hip hop head, buying mixtapes out of the trunk of a car. And always know that a copy is always inferior to the original. Be your authentic self. And the voice and gift that you have been given is attuned to a certain group of people who will support and affirm you. John Coltrane does not sound like Charlie Parker. Miles Davis doesn't sound like Louis Armstrong. Though they play the same instrument, their tonality is attuned to a very specific audience. Find your tone, play your song, and let God do what God does.
Thank you so much, Reverend Moss, just for being you, for sharing. I just want to encourage everybody, get this book. The principles here are practical. They are grounded in history, in tradition, but it speaks to life. And I just really enjoyed reading this. I'm going to reread it again just because I need to spend some time with some of these things. And I appreciate you. I thank you for the time. I wanted to talk about the epilogue, but I want to take too much more of your time.
Oh no, please. If you want to, I that's actually my favorite chapter.
Listen, can you just give a nugget on that? Because I feel like it's forgotten history that you highlight here that could change the entire course of so many people's conversations right now. Tell me about what happened in the epilogue. You addressed the creation of whiteness and how it is that, we've developed into the America we are now with possibility for the future.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because at one time the editors at Simon and Schuster was saying, do you think that they wanted to take that out? They said, this is for another book. I said, no, it has to be in here because it brings together everything that we've been talking about. Yeah. And what many people don't understand is that whiteness is a social construction. It was just made up. It was just created. It's just a figment of people's imagination, what I call the racialized imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And when the first 20 or so odd Africans arrived on these shores, they did not arrive necessarily as slaves. They arrived as indentured Africans, and they were called Africans.
Mm.
And in the book, I talk about this one gentleman who I consider to be our patriarch. His name was Antonio. Mm. And Antonio then marries another indentured African woman, this woman by the name of Mary. Mm-hmm. So Antonio and Mary are really the progenitors of who we are in America. And they amassed, some writings say that they amassed 700 acres of land. Some writings say it was 500. Either way it is, they would have been the wealthiest Black family in Maryland and Virginia if their land had not been stolen from them. There was a reason that the land was stolen, not just because they were Black. Something happened in Virginia in the 1600s, it was known as the Bacon Rebellion, where indentured Africans, remember, we were called African. They didn't call us Black. They didn't call us Negro. They were calling us African. They said we were from Africa.
Yeah.
And there were white people who were indentured too. And Africans, along with the Irish and other Polish and German immigrants, not immigrants, indentured servants, got together and revolted. They said that the issue is not you. The issue is the person who owns the plantation. So there was this revolution. And once that happened, they then created what was called the white wage. They said, we're not going to give you more money, you, the indentured white person, but we are going to call you white. We'll give you status. You'll be better than these Africans who won't have the status that you have. So they wanted to make sure that there would never be a coalition again. And as a result, they then started taking the word African out of the vocabulary and replacing that word we know today as Negro, or more and more harsh terms, nigger. And whiteness was born when they were trying to figure out how to keep Black people and immigrants or indentured servants from building coalitions to overthrow a slaveocracy. That is the reason whiteness was built. And so you will notice, if you read literature from the 1600s, nobody's called white. They don't call themselves white. They identify by the country that they come from, that they are Irish or German. But then in the 1700s, you start to hear these terms of white come into the literature, because that was designed specifically to ensure that Black people and poor indentured white people, indentured servants, would not build relationships and overthrow the plantation. And it's still working today, where you have people who vote for someone like a Trump, who has no interest in those who are poor in America, but he uses so-called white resentment. These other people are taking from you. They're coming across the border from you. They're taking, using negativity. Or in Florida, you have someone say, don't teach this history. It's un-American to learn African-American history. Again, trying to keep the hierarchy and the separation. Because when young Black people learn history and young white people learn history, and Asian and Indigenous and Latino, we start getting together and realize the real problem is not each other. The real problem is the person who still thinks they own that plantation.
Wow. Thank you. I thank you so much for that. And thank you for your time again, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss, Dancing in the Darkness. If you want to read the rest of that story, you want to get the nuggets that you have from Dr. King's legacy, Howard Thurman, how do we deal with what we're facing today? please, please get the book. Reverend Moss, thank you again for being with us.
It was my pleasure, sir. Thank you very much, and for the work that you are doing. We really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.